for me, this is an extremely striking looking car. And beyond just being striking, I think it's a very good looking car because it's purposeful. And you'll see that. I'll show you why I think this is a very purposeful looking car. Because as much as it is a pretty looking thing, you can see a lot of it is driven by the pursuit of aerodynamics. So it's pretty cool, and we'll get a little bit closer up to it when we do eventually start kind of talking around the car. But to start with, the color. It's a triple layer red called Memphis Red. I had initially actually ordered a white car and saw it and just couldn't say no, to be honest. Took a weekend to mull it over and then just went, yeah, you know what, I kind of need the red. So I think it was a good choice overall. The first thing that tends to strike you is these skeletal looking headlights. They look like basically sunken in hollow eyes in a skull. I think they look quite cool. When it first came out, the car was very controversial for these skeletal headlights, but when you get closer in, you actually see the purpose behind them. And that is that they are actually hollow. You don't really see it, but they're hollow. So you can see here, I can stick my whole hand through the headlight. And the reason for that is back behind the actual headlights is a radiator. So there are two low temperature radiators behind each of the headlights. Not something you'd normally look at when you see the car. Not something you'd normally know. But again, just another point as to them pushing the car's design with the intent of aero. In addition to the headlights, there's a low temperature radiator behind here, but in through there is also a pair of vents. So it goes down in here, and I believe it leads to the wheel well, and that's for brake cooling. So there's two, one on this side and one on that side. So once we come around to the side of the car, inside the car, well rather inside the wheel well, you can see there's a vent here, right here, and there are vents on the inside of the wheel well as well. Now those are to release low pressure air that gets trapped inside the wheel well when the car's going at speed. There's also a vent or a duct in here, and I believe there's another one hidden further inside. And what that does is it extracts hot air from cooling the brakes and uses it to create downforce over the car. So again, very cool, nifty little kind of touches or double uses that they've made for air that's passing through and over the car. As we proceed further, if you look at the front of the car, you can actually see that there are channels that have been created. So this flamed bodywork here, it's not just to look pretty. The purpose of it is to bring air along the side of the car, and once you get to this point here, you see it forms a fairly clear valley. And it actually brings the air over the top, around the sides, and into the door. And that sounds a bit weird, into the door. Well, the thing is, McLaren have created this door as a double skin door. So when they first released the car, people were sat there wondering how you've got a mid-engine car with no vents on the side to cool the engine that's at the back, because the side surface is completely clear. If you look at any other mid-engine car, they've got vents on the side. This one doesn't. And the reason for that is the door is actually double skin. So the air comes along here and disappears into the door. You can see my whole forearm is basically in the door, and the vent is set inside here. So if I open the door, you'll actually be able to see right there. I can stick my arm through it. Those are high temperature radiators behind there. So the air comes through the door into there to cool the engine. It's a fairly cool little bit of aero trickery going on there. So that lets them kind of keep the side of the car looking fairly clean. The door itself, I think the door itself is probably one of the most striking parts of the car, just because of the depth of the bodywork. I mean, look at the way this is formed over here. You've got, the bodywork's beautiful. They've actually formed this door and other major structural components of the car in aluminum, as opposed to, I believe it's called CSP or something like that, which is the normal kind of metal that they'd use. So they formed it out of aluminum to create the crisp lines that you see here. Just very cool, very, very cool. Here's the vent that I was talking about right there. So behind here, there's another vent. So this is what I'm saying in terms of you don't really get to see the depth of the bodywork in pictures. You really don't. And in person, it creates an extremely striking effect. Over the top here, we've got the carbon fiber door mirrors. Now, the upper of this car has been specced with carbon fiber. Now, you can spec this here that's in grey, and the inside of the headlights, all of this right here. You can spec this in carbon fiber as well, but for this particular car, it's done in grey. Similarly, for the splitter at the front, this is grey colored, but you can have this in carbon fiber if you'd like. But what we've done for this car is we've got this panel right here, these little nostrils, that's done in carbon fiber, and we've got the door mirrors done in carbon fiber, and not really much else. Very cool. There's another duct in here, and this also leads in, and I believe it leads in and through, and it comes out the back of the wing over there, which we'll get to in a mo. But again, just kind of following the lines of the car back, you can just see the protruding hips here. It looks fantastic, I think, anyway. So as we kind of move along to the back, you can see further kind of aero channels on the back, which lead to the wing. Speaking of the wing, it is a fully active aerodynamic wing. So very cool. It's currently set in the up position. It's hydraulically activated. It's hydraulically actuated, and it's very, very cool because at speed, this is flush with the car. It's not up as it is here. Now, once you get to about 80 mile an hour, it raises into this position. Now, this is at about 30% of its full deflection. Once you accelerate hard with the wing up, it actually uses Formula One tech, DRS, drag reduction system, and it drops the wing down to 10% to minimize the drag that it's creating and give you maximum kind of go power if you want. So the wing drops down to about 10%, and then as soon as you let off the throttle, it comes back up to 30%. And the weird thing is, you'd think something like that isn't really, you know, it doesn't really have an effect, but when I'm driving the car, I notice these things. You can feel the wing come up, and you can feel the drag that's created on the car as a result. That's not the coolest thing about it, though. The coolest thing about it is the air brake functionality that they've created. So when you stomp on the brakes, even if the wing is completely down, when you stomp on the brakes at speed, it pops up and deflects vertical like an air brake. Very, very cool to see. Bit scary because it kind of blocks your rear view mirror completely and you can't see what's about to crash into the back of you, but very, very cool to see working. So one of the most interesting things to me is, well, you don't get a scale for it, but how deep the wing actually is. When the car's washed, quite frequently you'll see a puddle of water just sat on the back of the wing, and it really goes to show how actually deep the wing is. So it looks pretty ridiculous in person. But anyway, we've got the super, super thin tail lights here that are very cool in person. They do that kind of Audi-esque, you know, when you turn on the turn indicator, it kind of goes, it's very cool. I don't know, it's just one of those little bits for the car that makes me kind of smile a bit. It's a bit stupid, but there we are. Yeah, super thin tail lamps. And then if we come around to the back, there's no 720S badging per se. I think the only one's there on the door at the side, which is kind of cool because it gives it a bit of a, you know, a bit of mystique. Even though it looks like a UFO on the road, people are kind of left wondering what it is. There is a McLaren badge here, so a bit of a badge and a logo, and that's pretty much it with regard to branding on the car. So very, very cool. Anyway, coming down further, you can actually see the hydraulics on the wing in quite a bit of detail back here. So if you're a bit of an engineering nerd, this is super cool to look at. I frequently find myself staring at it quite a lot and just kind of having a peek inside because it's just really cool to see the way it's actuated. Coming down to the exhausts, it is a stainless steel entirely through from the engine. It's a stainless steel exhaust. Now there is an option for a titanium one. When I purchased the car, there wasn't. I'd probably have that titanium exhaust, but unfortunately the timing didn't work out. But don't worry, the next one will definitely have a titanium exhaust. But the exhaust note's pretty good as is. So we've got the little reversing camera back here, so it's not without its creature comforts. It does have a little reversing camera. And once we get down low, you can see here hanging down effectively is the diffuser. So this is a major aerodynamic component for the rear of the car, and it creates quite a bit of downforce. They're quite cagey about the numbers, but I think it creates roughly about 200 kilos of downforce, the entire car, at speed. I could be wrong about this, I probably am, but these are just numbers that I've heard thrown around. What's really cool is through here you can actually see the diff, the gearbox, all that sort of good stuff. It doesn't have a diff, sorry, the gearbox. The diff is a completely different thing, which we'll cover shortly, but it is not a traditional differential as you'd imagine. It actually uses braking to sort that out, but we'll talk about that later. But yeah, just through there, the amount that you can see is super cool. It looks really raw. You can see the gizzards of it effectively, and it's just a very cool thing to see in person. But that's pretty much the outside of the car, as far as my knowledge goes. I have read up quite a lot about it, but I'm sure there's lots that I'm not telling you. It's a bit weird filming this in a different setting than I'm normally sat at in front of my computer, but hopefully I've covered enough to keep it relatively interesting. But yeah, that is the outside of the McLaren 720S. Yeah. So we're going to cover the interior a little bit, just some little facets and little interesting bits of the interior, and just to give you guys a general kind of look at what the inside of this car is like. So as a whole, the first thing you're going to notice obviously is the door. Now, a very cool part of the door is how the roof section actually goes up with the door. That actually makes it really easy to jump in and out of the car. It becomes massively easy to just kind of put your hand here and hop in and out. That's hot. One of the cool bits is this door panel up here, this door section, or rather this roof section, well, it's a little bit of both, can be specced with glass on the top, and you can actually spec this with glass on the top. I believe it's Gorilla Glass, or you can have just carbon fiber and it'll look the same on the inside. This has just got the default black panel on the top just to make it look a little bit lower, and I kind of like that because it makes the car feel a little bit more confined as a whole. So I kind of like that it doesn't have the glass. That being said, I haven't actually driven a car that's got the glass in it. I've sat in one and it looks okay, but I do kind of like the cooped in feeling that, you know, not having that much air running through the car gives you anyway. So that's just a little bit of an interesting kind of portion to it. So moving on from the doors, you come down to the sills over here. So these you can actually have spec'd in exposed carbon as well, because this is carbon fiber. It's part of the structure of the car, which is called the monocage 2. Now the carbon monocage 2 is the chassis, it's the tub of the 720S. It's effectively its spine, and again we'll cover that a little bit more when I'm driving the car, so we'll talk about that once we get to the bit where we have to go over driving dynamics and things like that. So we're just going to keep going on with the interior. So anyway, the sill is nice and low. It makes it easy to get into. It's a very usable car, and you've got the steering wheel right in front of you. And the brilliant thing about the steering wheel is that McLaren have said that they want the steering wheel to be only to steer the car, so you don't have audio control buttons and cruise control and all of that. All you have is a simple pure steering wheel with the paddles on either side. So we've got the double hinge paddles, which are really satisfying to kind of click. They feel like a trigger on a gun. It's just a metallic kind of mechanical actuation. It's very, very cool. So you can see it when I pull the left paddle, the right one actually moves because they're double hinged, which means you can upshift and downshift just using one hand on either side. So that's very cool. The steering wheel, the bottom of the steering wheel is finished in carbon. So we've got the interior carbon pack. We've got carbon on the inside around the sat nav and all of that. So it kind of had to be done. Gives it a bit of a sporty look, and I kind of like that. Moving on to what is easily one of the coolest parts of the 720S is this right here. So the driver information system. So it's basically currently in a stowed position. Now this, when I give power to the car, will flip up and reveal to me the full screen. So if I give the car some power, the dash actually reveals itself to you, and there we are. So that's then your rev counter and all of that. Now the super cool thing is when you actually put the car in track mode, the display folds down again, and it actually has a display on the top right there giving you just your gear, your revs, and the speed on the right, which is really, really cool. And the car's, you know, it's a funny thing I saw on a review somewhere, and they just said, you know, it's like this so you can fucking concentrate on what you're doing. And, you know, kind of relevant. I did use it. I do use it sometimes. It is fairly useful. It's very cool because you get the Formula 1 style shift lights on the top as well. So fairly useful when you're trying to drive the car a little harder. But, you know, it's so cool to just plop yourself in the seat, give the car ignition power, and the dash just kind of folds up and greets you. I love that. So beyond that, obviously, you've got, you know, all your aircon vents, and you've got the 3 buttons on the side. That one lifts the screen up, that locks the car, and that opens the frunk, which is the front trunk. And the really nice thing about the inside of this car, which is different from a lot of other, you know, high-end cars, is the switch gear for this car, the buttons, the gear change, the stalks, even the air conditioning vents. It's all proprietary McLaren. It's not taken from another manufacturer's parts bin. This was designed and built specifically for this car. It's aluminum. They didn't borrow this, you know, they didn't borrow the design from anybody else. They didn't, you know, pull an Aston Martin and grab Mercedes-Benz switchgear and put it in the car, which is not a bad thing, but it just feels a little special to know that these buttons are not sat in you know, another car that costs, you know, a fourth or a fifth of the price, because it takes away a little bit of the special feeling that you get from the car. So that's one of the bits that I really, really like about it. And obviously, as you'd expect, all of the rotary dials and the buttons are very heavy, have a mechanical click to them. It's very well built. The materials are just top notch. You can't complain, you really can't. Right, and moving over to the central stack of the car right here. So you've got another 2 air conditioning vents, a bit different this time, and you've got what is here a vertical screen. So it's like it's effectively a tablet. It's running, I believe, a skinned version of Android called Iris. It's McLaren's own system, I suppose, that they've grabbed Android and they've skinned it on top, I suppose. It works fairly well. It is a touchscreen. It gives you pretty much everything you wanna, you know, have. It's got your air conditioning, so it's got a bunch of physical buttons, and you've got all the air conditioning controls as touchscreen functions, which is good and bad. It feels very high tech when you're sat here, you know, not moving, but when you're actually driving the car and you want to change the speed of the air conditioning, having to kind of tap around on the screen and then kind of lift it up that way, it's a little bit distracting, I feel, especially when you realize that you've got no physical skip, play, and pause buttons, and you've got to go to the media function and then click next button. And when you're driving the car and you've got to look down here to tap on the screen, it gets a little bit finicky, but it's not too bad. It's a very pretty system. The graphics are fantastic. It's very pretty. It works very well. You know, you've got your radio functions, you've got your phone, you've got all of that. So it works well enough. I haven't had the system lag out on me. I haven't had the system crash yet. So all of the graphics from the central display over to the actual driver information display are very crisp. You really can't complain. So when you set it into dynamic, you've actually got a very cool application called variable drift control. So in the dynamic mode, you can actually set how much you want traction control to kick in or not. So if you want to be a complete yob, you can just turn it all the way off and start sliding the car around, or you can have it control the car's oversteer a little bit more. But very cool, very nifty thing. So anyway, that's the dynamic panel right there. So you see, you switch it back into sport and the screen comes back up, and it's fine and dandy. You can see the car's finished in this kind of suede material up here, and it's got leather down there. So you've got, again, leather and suede So it's a little bit of a mix and match. It gives it a really nice finish. I think they call it Harissa Red, is the red leather. So it's a really nice finish. It finishes the outside of the car very nicely. So it matches and it looks pretty good. In person, I think it gives it a fairly stunning appearance. So I'm not complaining, that's for sure. So that's pretty much the front bit of the car. Now if we go around to the back and we look at the back of the car, you can see there's quite a bit of space, and that comes from having the engine set down low and further to the back. So the car wants me to turn off the, there we are, so turn off the ignition. That's fine. So you've got quite a lot of quite a lot of luggage space in the back. And one of the most interesting features about the back is the fact that the pillars are actually made out of glass. Now again, when we talk about the chassis and the monocage 2, the carbon tub, we'll come back to why those pillars are in glass. But yeah, it's a very airy cabin. There's a lot of visibility. There's a lot of room. The dash is set very low, so you've got some really good visibility looking out the front of the car. The scuttle is set very low. So again, very, very comfortable to drive because the visibility is fantastic. Like there are no blind spots out to your left or to your right rear. It's a very easy car to drive. It's not intimidating at all. And I kind of like that about it. But yeah, that basically covers most of the interior. Obviously on the doors you've got the window switches and the door release to just pull the door open. And yeah, that covers the interior of the car for the most part. So, the McLaren 720S. Just approaching a little village here. Slow down a little bit, respect the speed limits. You know, once I settled into the car and I got about 10, 15, 20 miles on it, it was a fairly friendly experience. It was comfortable. The car kind of wrapped itself around me and it just went, okay, I got familiar with it. It's no longer daunting and scary. So that was my initial impression, and that's what it's like inside the cabin. Not too daunting or scary. What is scary is when you put your foot down and you start throwing it around a little bit. Mother Mary. Ah, this thing flies. So, onto the powertrain. The engine. Well, it's not really an engine, really. It's McLaren's gone to the military and figured out how to make a nuclear bomb, and then they've gone and put it back there and somehow hooked it up to wheels. And all of that explosive power is delivered to the road via the rear wheels. So it's a 4-liter twin-turbo V8. Okay. The prior engine was 3.8. They made some modifications for this. So this is a 4-liter twin-turbo V8, 710 brake horsepower, claimed. I, for one, refute that claim. It's making more than 710 horsepower. Trust me, it's definitely making more than that. And about 770 Newton meters of torque. So, massively, massively powerful for something that, to give you some context, weighs just about as much as a Volkswagen Golf. This is a 800 horsepower Volkswagen Golf, effectively, carbon tub and all of it, you know, in terms of the weight. So just to put that into perspective for you. So you'd expect, with the turbocharged aspect of it, a little bit of turbo lag. I'm pleased to report there isn't any. Nope. You put your foot down and you just that's it. There's no other word for it. You don't accelerate, you don't proceed, you don't rapidly disappear. Now you just off. That's it. There's no questions, no arguments, nothing. And the way you move forward is as though you're being driven by a four-wheel drive car, but really, this thing is driven through the rear wheels only. And okay, calm it down. It's driven through the rear wheels only, and that takes you by surprise a lot of the time. We'll get to that a little bit more when we talk about the chassis and the suspension and all of that, and I'll explain why this thing has got the traction that it does. But just the engine itself is phenomenally responsive, ridiculously powerful. You can't fault it. It revs out to about 8,000, and if you didn't tell me that this was turbocharged and I couldn't hear the turbos whooshing and fluttering and releasing wastegate noises, I wouldn't have a clue, I'll be honest. The immediacy and absolute savagery of the power delivery is like nothing else I've ever driven before. And I've driven Ferrari 488s and Ferrari 458s. And the amount of power and the way this thing hooks up makes those feel like milk cartons. Jeez. So that's a big tick mark on the engine then. Yeah, that works fairly well. Right. If I were driving this around town, I can almost forget that it can do that. So it's kind of a pussycat to drive around town, really, the engine. Not really much to worry about. No turbo lag, so again, low speed, the responsiveness is great. It just, when you want it to, you put your foot flat and it just really. So no complaints from me there. Moving on to the gearbox. Oh, the gearbox. Double shift down from 5th to 3rd, did it immediately. 2nd, and up another, woo, down 1, down 2. This gearbox is a masterpiece. This gearbox is an absolute masterpiece. There is no lag between the shifts. There is a sense of immediacy that I've never driven in any other car before. Porsche's PDK comes close. In fact, I think it kind of matches it, probably. So the gearbox is absolutely rapid. You can see me pull the paddles and you can hear the engine in the back change note. And it is immediate. And do you know what? It's almost telekinetically quick. You just have to think about changing gear and it's done. It's absolutely jaw-dropping. Absolutely jaw-dropping, to the point where once you get to a set of corners and you start pushing the car a little bit through them, 3rd, 4th, long sweeping corner here. Under the bridge, into the brakes, down 1. Down another. And it's almost as if the gearbox is dancing between the gears. You can play it like a musical instrument. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I have occasionally noted that the gearbox doesn't really want to switch from 2nd to 1st at certain points. When you're doing about 25, 30 mile an hour, sometimes you'll just go, no, this is the better gear. This is the better gear for you to be in, kind of thing. So it overrides your actions sometimes. Which, to be honest, speaking personally, probably not a bad thing. I'm an idiot. The car is smarter than I am. You shift down and you hear the engine rev match and you see the number change in front of you, and that's just about all the feedback you get that the car's just shifted down. It's tremendous. So downshift's a butter smooth, and upshifts gives you a nice kick in the back of the head when you're wide open on the throttle. I like that. I like that little bit of drama. I like it. When you've got a car that has 800 horsepower and weighs nothing, you're gonna want it to have some big ass brakes on it. I'm happy to report the McLaren 720S has got some very effective brakes. The brakes on this are actually smaller than the brakes on the 675 LT, which is the track version of the last car, but they're more powerful. So they're carbon ceramic brakes, and they provide more stopping power than the previous iteration. It brakes so hard. It brakes so damn hard that your eyeballs are thrown to the front of your skull. And you can feel pressure building behind your eyeballs. That's how hard this thing brakes. In fact, I'd say the braking sometimes is a little bit more violent than the acceleration, and the acceleration is pretty rapid, and then you get to the brakes and it just rips your face right off. Whew. Now the brake feel itself, the feel of the brakes around town, and again when you're pootering around the city, the brakes feel very, very stiff. They feel like they're not calibrated properly when you're wandering around town. When you're driving it on the motorway and you're kind of going around town and you're not really pushing the car at all, you're just kind of driving it as is, and you know, you're not too worried about it. It feels like the brake pedal's a bit too stiff. You've got to really stand on the brakes. You know, you've got about 1.5 to 2 inches before you kind of, okay, there's the car slowing down now. So it feels like it's not calibrated right. It feels like you sink your foot into the brake and you go, why is it not braking? And then you sink your foot into the brake even harder, and then the car kind of then just goes, oh, okay. So around the city, it takes some getting used to. Probably not the best. But when the road opens up and you start dropping a few gears and you start pushing the car a little bit, you begin to understand why the brakes are the way they are. Because when the road opens up, this goes from being calibrated incorrectly to being calibrated beautifully. Oh, Christ almighty, how I haven't crashed this thing yet or wrapped it around a tree backwards on fire, I'll never know. Probably the electronics saving my ass, to be honest. But yeah, so you go from pretty weird, iffy brake feel to just having beautifully balanced and calibrated brake feel through the brake pedal. Wonderful. And the brake stopping power is you always want to over brake a car. You never want to have less braking power than you do actual go forward power. So well done there, McLaren. The brakes on this are stupendous. The steering is accurate, well calibrated, and very, very reliable. It's sharp as well, so it takes a while to get used to. kind of just snap the car around and it just follows it. No arguments. I love doing that. Double click and it just drops down 2. And drops down another 2, fourth to second. And down into first. God, it's a good gearbox. Right, so that's the steering. But it's only one part of the handling. So what does the chassis do when you start throwing it about a little bit? Well, there's no point having super sharp handling if the chassis can't really handle speed or if it feels unsettled. Now, 2 things to note. First thing, this car is a carbon tub. So, in 1981, McLaren introduced in the MP41 Formula 1 car the world's first carbon tub in a Formula 1 car. In 1993, they brought the first carbon chassis to a road car, the McLaren F1. And then in 2011, the 12C had the first iteration called the monocell. What I'm sitting in right now is the monocage 2. So there's monocell in 2011. Okay, they developed it further into the monocage, and then this 2018 is the monocage 2. What I'm effectively sitting in is, if you can imagine, a carbon bathtub making up the chassis of this car. It goes over the top, pillars over the top, and the entire bottom of the floor is just carbon. It's one carbon tub. I'm sitting in a carbon cage, effectively. Okay? And what that means is, this car is rigid. And when I say rigid, I don't mean it from a suspension perspective. I mean it from the way you can just snap it. There's no flex in the chassis. It doesn't feel soft and wallowy. The chassis feels like it's bolted to my spine. It's fantastic. Okay, so the next facet of the chassis is, or rather the chassis and the suspension, is the suspension. So what you have here is 4 hydraulic independent units. So it doesn't have anti-roll bars. Each suspension unit on each side of the car, so all 4 of them for each 4 tires, is independent of each other completely. They're controlled by a computer and are hydraulically actuated. So it's called PCC2, Proactive Chassis Control 2. Now the proactive part of it basically means that the car is sensing what the road conditions are like, and then individually, every nanosecond, slackening or firming up the dampers. It's incredible. There are 12 more sensors in each wheel hub than there were before. That's 12 more than there were before. Accelerometers, gyroscopes, all sorts of things in the wheel hubs, and they measure the road conditions and the way the car's responding to the road via the chassis, via the suspension. And they then begin to make adjustments to the suspension to best suit the road. Now PCC2, Proactive Chassis Control 2, was a system developed during a 5-year PhD program in Cambridge by 3 doctors of engineers. And one of the key elements of it of PCC2, or one of the key goals of PCC2, is to maximize the amount of contact that the tire has with the road. Okay, because as you're going around a corner, or as the car's moving around on bumps, the tire patch, the contact patch of the tire on the road is reduced when you've got a static setup. Now when you move to a semi-active setup, the car can actually then adjust according to the conditions in order to maximize pheasants on the road, goodbye. In order to maximize the amount of tire contact with the road. And what that basically means for me as the driver is that the amount of traction and grip that I get, and therefore the amount of speed that I can carry through a corner, is simply astonishing. It's incredible. You can feel when it comes to braking, you can feel the air brake pop up, deflect vertical, and settle the rear of the car. I've felt before on the brakes hard, the back squirming around, and then you can feel that squirming around being kind of settled a little bit, and you look in your rear view mirror and you see the air brake deflected. It's almost like magic, almost. It's just incredible. And you can feel when you accelerate and the wing is up, you can feel it drop down and the car kind of surges forward. And then when you lift, the wing comes up, not to its full air brake position, but it comes up to stabilize the rear end. And you can feel that drag on the back of the car. And these are all sensations that come together, you know, with the PCC2 and the carbon tub and the aero working to push the car down onto the road. These are all sensations that come together to create a fairly special driving experience. Now, you'd sit there and you'd go, well, for £250,000, you'd expect a fairly special driving experience. Yeah, but what I mean is it's a different driving experience from a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. It is a different driving experience from a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, simply because those cars, those Italian cars, they are bewitching because they're emotional to drive. The engine's wailing in your ears, the sound's beautiful, you know, and then you've got the speed. Now, it's nothing like the speed this can generate in a short period of time, but you've got the speed. And then you realize, you know, once you start understanding and you start feeling the systems at work, you start realizing that this car is bewitching not because of the emotional experience. It's simply bewitching because it's just the sheer focus of having something engineered specifically to go stupid fast and nothing else. It's bewitching because you begin to feel science and engineering coming together in a very tactile fashion. The wastegate just... You feel science and engineering coming together in a really tactile fashion. I think the savagery of the performance is the fun. I think the sheer capability of this car is the fun. I think the way you question physics every time you feel this thing accelerate is part of the fun. The way it goes around a corner and you sit there and you think, how the f*** did you do that? It's part of the fun. So to the people that say that McLarens are no fun, I don't get it. I don't get it at all. You've got to really push the car on to begin understanding why it's so special. You have to start pushing the car on a little bit before you start realizing why it's so special. Now, you've got to realize that with the interior being as refined, as quiet, as damped as it is, because it's not extremely loud in here. I've driven a Lamborghini Huracan Performante. That's loud on the inside. That sounds like there's a fucking explosion going on in the back. But when it quietens down like this, you know, it's not that much of an experience. And then you start to realize that if you can afford a £250,000 supercar, you can afford another car that does comfort, refinement, and quality a lot better. So you want your £250,000 supercar to be an experience at 30 miles an hour. Every time you get in it, you want to be like, oh my God, you know. In this, I've jumped in, gone to Tesco's for a shop and driven back, completely oblivious to the fact that it is what it is, a supercar. Now that's both a good and a bad thing. If this were your only car, I would agree with you. The duality, the breadth of capability, the refinement while being able to tear your face off, while being able to do the rest of it, probably a good thing. But then you look at the target market for the car and then you realize that, you know what, maybe it does need to be a little bit worse. It's too damn good. It's too damn refined while being too damn good to drive. But I tell you what, I love it. I love this thing to bits and pieces. I adore it. I adore the way it goes around corners, and I adore the way it goes, and I adore all of it. As for the problem with it not being raw enough, well, the solution to that problem is on the way. And it's called the long tail. It'll be here in a couple of years. And that's when they take this car and they strip out the sound deadening. They make it lighter. They add more aero. They add a little bit more power. And then the car becomes manic and terrifying. As if this wasn't already, but you know, this is still relatively approachable. Then you get to the LT, which screams, shouts, pops, bangs, flames, all of it. Yeah, that's going to be the one to look out for. But you know what? Ferrari 488, Lamborghini Huracan, McLaren 720S. It's the 720S. It has to be. There's no comparison. There just isn't in terms of the way this goes and stops and turns and handles. I guess to conclude, when you look at this car in perspective, or in the perspective of McLaren being a manufacturer that has only been mass producing road cars from 2011, 7 years ago, begin to get a little bit of context. 7 years of producing cars and they've come to this, which will outstop and outhandle anything from Ferrari and Lamborghini. 7 years it took them to beat Ferrari and Lamborghini. That's it. You look at that in context, and you look at the rate of progress they've been making, and you're excited for the future, because I know I am. McLaren, 5 years from now, 5 years from now, I don't even think it's going to be a competition 5 years from now. Add a bit of emotion into the car and it's game over. That's it. This thing is incredible. Absolutely jaw-dropping. This car is phenomenal, and I guess in the words of a 70-year-old, 70-year-old. He said, "I have never before experienced anything like this in my life. And I don't think I ever will." So those were the words of Ken on the 720S. I told him, I'm like, wait for the LT. It's coming. And I'm going to get one. And we're going to go out in that, and then I'll blow your mind all over again. But yeah, I hope that was in a format that will somewhat convey to you what I feel about this car. Because I think it's incredible. I think it is exhilarating. It's tremendous. It's beautiful in every metric. It just needs a bit of emotion. And I'm happy to report they're working on it. They know. So, on to the next one, I guess. Excited about the next one. Not that this one isn't exciting enough. Bloody hellfire. Whew. Alright, cool. Guess that's that. That doesn't get old, I'll tell you that.